Can I check that you can hear me?
I can, Alistair.
Okay, I'm hoping that everybody else will. Yes, thank you, Anthony. Yeah, thank you, Tony. Right, strategies to support reading, really significant area of work, and actually enormously large as well. This particular session is part of a series. Ron, if you can click the intro bit just below there. Again, I'm not going to go through all this in detail because you'll have access to exactly this learning object in about probably 20 minutes time. But this is part of the Future Teacher series, and this particular session, click on the about this session, will be lovely. We're going to take account, and we've planned it taking account of the fact that we're likely to have a range of people with a range of different experiences, and so we've tried to take that into account. Now again, you can have a look at that in your own time, but it's just to say that we've got some research in here, we've got some basic stuff, we've got some technology, we've got some pedagogy. We're trying to cover a lot of bases. So next slide. When I say we are trying to, this is who the we are. We have Lillian, myself in the middle, and Ron, and we've all worked in education for longer than the dinosaurs, I think. And we're part of this Future Teacher project. Again, if we open up that section, and you can come back and see all these links afterwards on your own. This is part of a whole series of sessions, and we've got subsequent monthly sessions coming up. The next one's on writing. Up on the screen here are some of the ones we've already had, and you can look at the recordings and the learning resources for all of those. They're all available for free. So next slide, if we start with what we're going to miss out. That's what we're going to start with, really, because now that diagram, apologies, that diagram's a little bit small. I'm just going to full screen so I can see it myself. Again, it'll be easier to see it in the on the learning object when you have access to it, but I just want to very quickly pull together the range of areas that this theme on supporting reading strategies could potentially cover, and it's actually huge, because there are individual elements like the student's interest, the student's attitude, the student's theory of mindset. You know, are they a fixed intelligence mindset, or are they a kind of growth intelligence mindset? Their neurodiversity, are they dyslexic? Do they have ADHD? Do they have Asperger's? And so on. And so there are a whole bunch of individual factors, but there are socio-cultural factors. We've got some really good research as well. Thanks, Ron, that's great. Really good research showing the importance of teacher skills, the importance of the strategies, applying metacognitive strategies and so on, and the difference it makes, but even the curriculum requirements, the home background, etc. And so what I've done, I've taken lots of different elements from the research and I plotted them on that kind of vertical scale between the individual and the social. And going upwards is the sort of the range from what skills are involved in reading. It's complex, it's multifaceted skill, and it starts with phoneme awareness and it goes to decoding, but also part of that's print exposure. That helps with phoneme awareness and decoding, and that's something that's maybe socio-cultural more than individual. There's knowledge vocabulary, there's prior content knowledge, things to hook onto, there's the cognitive processing, then there's the metacognitive strategies. There's a lot we can do. If we zoom out again to the main resource, what we're going to cover within that huge area, in this session we're going to cover, the focus on this session is going to be on, first of all, the ironies of text. I'll explain that in a moment, but we're going to look at alternatives to text. We're going to look at the really valuable, unique selling points of text, because there's some really special things that we take for granted in text. We're then going to look at the elements of reading. So that's focusing much more on the individual needs and individual skills. We'll look at the pedagogy, pedagogical practices, responsibilities of authors and providers as well. And then some things you can do institutionally. Now, again, we're not going to look at this in detail, but just to let you see that when you get this resource in 20 minutes time, if you click on notes, you'll find there's a lot more notes there on the individual, the socio-cultural context, and then under further reading, we've got links wherever possible. I've tried to use resources that are open access, where you'll be able to access them even if you don't have a kind of institutional subscription to a particular journal. In some cases, I haven't been able to do an open access one, but that'll be clear in the information. So, next slide. This is just to put this in context, because there are some really important things about reading that we take for granted. And November the 16th, 1532, in a place called Cajamarca in Peru, 168 Spaniards came face to face with an Inca ruler surrounded by 80,000 of his people. And the 168 Spaniards defeated the 80,000 Incas. Now, it's very easy to put that down to horses, weapons, etc. But none of that actually makes sense, because when you ask how those 168 Spaniards even got close to those 80,000 people without being stopped in the way, actually, Jared Diamond, in his book Guns, Germs and Steels, argues that this wasn't a failure of military tactics. It wasn't a military asymmetry. This was an information asymmetry, because the Spanish general was well versed in 1,000 years worth of battle strategies from the Romans and the Greeks all the way through, because he could read about them. The Incas had no writing system, no historical accounts. There was a huge information asymmetry. The Incas were limited to personal experience. The Inca ruler had failed to take appropriate precautions, had failed to understand the risks of the Spaniards arriving and not being channeled. Lack of access to text is lack of access to history, to knowledge and skill. We must never take text for granted. And we're going to explore the tools that learners can use to readdress this balance of power. So, next slide, please. I just want to look at the ironies of text for a minute, because I do a lot of work with students with disabilities, and we give a lot of advice and guidance as part of JISC's service. And this is an activity I put together a few years ago, where I just plotted on different kind of channels and media for information giving. I plotted the favoured media for different learners with different difficulties. So the further out it comes, the more favoured it is. So we see for a dyslexic person, text is not a very favoured medium. Okay, if we look at the next one, and again, you can go through these in your own time. Learning difficulties, very similar. Text, generally not a favoured medium compared to having something interactive or images, audio and video. Next one. Concentration difficulties. Now, there's a range of reasons why somebody may have difficulties concentrating, but text is not the favoured medium. The next one. Visual impairment. Well, text may be a semi-favoured medium. It's got a bit higher there, because you can use text-to-speech tools, you can use screen readers, etc. to access text, but it's not the favoured medium. Next one. The students who are deaf, text not a favoured medium. That may be a surprise to you, but because BSL, British Sign Language, is constructed so differently in terms of its grammar and its the way it works, it's very much like me trying to read German. It's not natural, it's not intuitive. Now, when you put all of those together, the final slide there, you find that of all the ways we could communicate to students, text is the least favoured one. And yet, if we look at the next main slide now, text tends to be the monoculture by which we do most of our communicating with students. So there are some ironies here. What we would like you to do for a few minutes now, we've allowed up to 5 minutes for this, 4 minutes because I'm running a minute over. We'd like you to, in the text chat pane, let us know how you, in your role, maybe currently contribute to diversification of teaching, taking away from this monoculture of text. Other things you already do, they might be obvious, but still put them in there. Other things that, maybe you're not directly involved in teaching, but in support or something. So are there other things you could do policy-wise, pedagogically? Is there a tool that you use? So how do you challenge the monoculture of text? That's what we'd like to see in the text chat pane. So 4 minutes, go to it. So that's brilliant. We've got some things coming here. So animations from Lillian. So Barbara providing text-to-speech tools. That's a really, really effective way of turning a least favored medium of visual text to a more favored medium of audio. So we've got videos in the information skills workshop. Great. One of the things that's interesting is how we might move good practices in kind of smaller areas, smaller, more defined areas, perhaps learning support and study support, etc., how we could move that out more broadly. So there may be some policy things. We've got instructional videos, great, thank you. Text-to-speech tools, again, this ClaraRead, an interesting one. A lot of people will be familiar with that. Okay, Anya, thank you. Different tools. So promoting, that's an interesting thing. I wonder to what extent this idea of promoting diversity of media could be almost embedded into module accreditation when you're creating a module. Could that be part of the policy that it has to encompass a minimum of other media? So we've got animations, one-to-ones with people. Yeah, human support is still, still a really important, valid thing. Bob using screencasts. Mind mapping, that's a really interesting one, because mind mapping is a way in which you can get a huge amount of text information, but in a visual and graphical way. But having the notes in each of the nodes of the mind map is a brilliant way of almost doing text by stealth. Embedded audio in the policy documents and student guides is an interesting thing there. So text to MP3s. And some highly specific things here from Kerry, the recreation of text into British Sign Language for deaf students. I think the day technology can take text and turn it into BSL and do it the other way around as well, that will be a really powerful leap forward. There are projects, I've been involved in a project myself on BSL to text, and it was perhaps at a very, very early stage of maturity. Okay, so we've got loads of things in there, loads of tools. Some people have mentioned tools, some have mentioned policies or approaches. If we move on to the next slide, and if you're still typing, that's great, keep those things coming in. What I just want to do very quickly is just to look at the USPs of text before we then look at the pedagogy. And we've got definitely one guest online, possibly two guests online. I need to check who will be able to take us through a little bit more. But I've identified here some of what I regard as the key unique selling points, the USPs of text. So if we click on the first one, and again, this will be quick because it's pretty obvious, but it's still worth being explicit about search. It's very hard to search through a video for a specific point. If you've got a podcast and you want to know, what did that person say? What was the name of that research? Was it Vygotsky or Vygotsky? Searching videos and audio is really, really difficult. But with text, it's brilliant and very easy to do. The navigation, if you create effective documents, accessible documents using heading styles, or if the organizations that you get material from have done that, then you have instant navigation either through the bookmarks of Adobe Reader or through the navigation pane in Microsoft Word or through the outline view in Google Docs. Fantastic, easy way to navigate through long, complex information. And the file size, of course, file size for text is tiny compared to file size for even a 30-second video. And so for people with mobile phones, with very close to their memory being used up, these sorts of text-based information is really effective and highly compatible. And then the next two are the text supporting rich media. I think this is something that's often overlooked, where I hear people say, oh, I've put some videos online. I haven't got any deaf students, so I didn't bother putting subtitles on. Well, subtitles or transcripts or even just a key point summary isn't just useful for a deaf student or a blind student. They're incredibly useful for anybody else. I have looked at many Haynes manuals in my life trying to sort my own car, and I've looked at pictures that were thought they were self-explanatory, and they weren't. And I've looked at IKEA instructions for assembling wardrobes, and just thought to myself, if only there were words. And I'm sure a lot of people can understand that. Text really supports other media because of all the different things that you can do with it. Sorry, Ron, if you can go back to that one. Yeah, print versus digital. This final point here about what about a printout? A lot of students I know will say, oh, give me something printed out because I can scribble on it and all sorts, which is great. You can do good things on printouts, but many students don't realize that you can do even better things on screen if you know about it. These are some of the things that we're going to look at in a lot more detail later, where we're going to give you about 8 versions of the same resource for you to play with. So on to the next one. Those are the USBs of text. And Ron, is it possible to open up Dina's microphone after we've shown the video?
Yeah.
Because I think Dina's still with us for a few minutes. And then, so I won't say anything here other than Dina uses a particular tool called the hypothesis. And I'd like you to listen to this, and then we can ask some questions. So I think probably by now, most people will have heard that. If you've finished, let us know. Yeah, Barbara is done, thank you. So any questions about that tool? What really struck me was the way in which, we're talking about PhD students here, and yet when Dina asked them, could their analysis of that text be shown, they weren't too keen. So any particular questions? Comments? You're finished, that's great. Any comments or questions, or ways in which you might use a tool like that with ESOL students or a range of other students? It needn't be an academic text. It might be the web page of your local surgery and how to book appointments.
Can I respond to Sue's comment?
Yep.
Sue, I think it's, I think yes, possibly because it's academic writing, and yes, it is more serious, but a lot of them are quite proficient writers. I think there's something about negotiating a text in annotated form, which is sort of more bitty, once they submit a text in full, they've gotten to a point where they can finesse it. But I think where something like hypothesis helps is in that, literally in that negotiation of reading in a critical way. And I think for a lot of students, particularly at doctoral level, I think there's more at stake for them to admit that there may be difficulties in that process, or how messy that process is.
Jessica suggests that there may be similar functionality in their reference management system. So I think that may be worth exploring, because again, we're not here to promote a particular tool, but what we liked there was the opportunity to promote the collaboration, because the research shows quite clearly that reading comprehension is and reading metacognition skills are really supported by collaborative work. And we'll look at another example in a second using a completely different approach, but needing face-to-face, whereas Dina's work, you could be face-to-face, but you could be asynchronous, you could be in different places.
I just wanted to comment about somebody's comment a bit before about Google Docs. Of course, you can do the same thing with Google Docs. But what this is quite nice with is to try to transition people to using the public posting as well, so that the comments begin to be open. While with Google Docs, it would remain closed. So in a way, I think something like this program allows them to transition from when they're less confident, posting to themselves, slowly posting to a group in dialogue, and then acting more like activists.
And am I right, Dina, in thinking that your comments appear within the document that you're looking at. So with Google Docs, for example, we could collaborate on something, but you wouldn't see it on the screen at the same time with the comments kind of spatially linked to the particular verse you were looking at or paragraph you were looking at.
Yeah, and Google Docs wouldn't allow you to necessarily collect a whole lot of different comments from a range of different texts around one tag, for instance, which is really
nice. Yeah. Great, thank you very much. I'm aware you've probably got to dash off to your other meeting now. Thank you very much for that,
Thanks,
Dina.
everyone. Bye.
Excellent, thanks for the video. Now, if we go back, if you're on YouTube at the minute, you're going to be looking at YouTube again in a moment, but this is a very different approach, but it's also this whole idea of pedagogy being important. It's the only bit of pedagogy we're going to look at, because from now on we're going to look at supporting independent reading and independent tools, etc. But the pedagogy is so important. From the research, it shows that those socio-cultural things make a very big difference, and there's some really nice research articles there that talk about the importance of the teacher skill, but also almost those cultural things that they encourage. What I love about what Dina's done and what Sandra has done is that they both take the starting point that reading is not automatic, comprehension is not automatic. These are skills that can be acquired. It fits brilliantly with Carol Dweck's kind of mindset of, growth mindset. And straight away you give people permission to not understand something, to not have a skill, and to know that they need to work at it, because it's very permissive, and it's saying, we're all in this together, let's work together. Now with Sandra's, I don't know, is Sandra on I haven't seen Sandra down the participant list. Have we got Sandra on the participant list? If so, she may be able to answer questions, but there's that second link there, the London Met video clip, which Ron hasn't.
Yes, it's in.
Oh yes, Ron's just popped it in. Yeah, thank you very much, Ron. Now it's only the first 30 seconds we need to look at. Sorry, Ron.
And I was going to say we are getting close to our schedule, Alistair. So,
okay,
yeah.
Right. Well, what I will do, perhaps I'll let you look at that in a moment, because I don't think we have Sandra on the list in order to be able to answer questions. Anyway,
it doesn't look like it. No.
Doesn't look like it. Okay, so come and look at the video later. But if I just tell you briefly what they do, and there's more notes that you can follow up, because very shortly we'll give you the link to this. What they do when the students have some initial reading, this is about week 4 or 5 into the course, they've got some initial reading, and it's about reading for research and studying and core literature. So what they do is they blow up onto A3 paper core extracts from the reading list. And then they get the students working in groups. And Ron, if we go back to that middle tab, we'll be able to kind of get a picture there. The background to the screenshot there is this kind of blown up A3 image of the text. And then the students work in 2s or 3s around that text, color coding it, putting their own interpretations on what this means or what the implications are, and then they turn that into an artifact of their own, which might be a comic strip, it might be a poster, it could be a range of different ways in which they interpret that text and make sense of it in their own way. From a metacognitive point of view, it's fantastic. It's really helpful because it's making them look at the details of that. Now, we can't ask many questions on that because we don't have Sandra there. So we'll move on to the next slide. If you want to follow up on that, use the future teacher list. More of that later. In the text chat here, we're going to give you the link to the learning object, and this is the point where I'm just going to swap screens for the next slide. So while you open up that learning object, I'm going to open up my shared screen. Make sure I share the right end. Okay, so now The reason we've shared this learning object with you now is because in a moment you're going to be clicking on some of the links and exploring this in your own way. But just for the minute, if you can just keep on my screen, it's slide 10 of the learning object, but I just want to give you a little bit of background to it first. One of the pieces of work that I've been doing with some colleagues over recent years is trying to map the wide range of technology tools that can support reading. Reading is complex, multi-leveled, we talked about that already, but there are a range of free tools, and all of these are free tools that will help you break down what it is that the student has. And in some students, it'll be one tool, one technique. In other students, it'll be something different. So we said that reading comes to all sorts of elements, but there's the comprehension side, and that's perhaps the top end of it. And we've seen work with Sandra and with Dina on that. But there's lots of ways in which comprehension can be included or can be facilitated by using summary tools, collaborative learning, just understanding definitions. Speed is an issue for some students, and there are tools to handle that. The comfort of reading, how you can read more comfortably, and that might be magnification, reflow, color change. That's significant for some students. For some students, it's distractibility, and so the focus, being able to just focus on the particular bits they need and not be distracted by the adverts or by the other hyperlinks, etc. And for a significant group of students, including international students as well as dyslexic and so on, but also people that just like listening to things, there's a lot of text-to-speech options. Now, what we'd like you to do, there is a link on the learning object on page 11 of the learning object, so you can switch to that now if you like, or we'll pop it in the text chat as well. It's in the text chat, yeah, learning it, slide 10 for the mind map. And we'd like you to open up the mind map in your own window. And although the mind map itself, the picture of the mind map, is not clickable, once you've decided there's a bit there that you would like to explore, maybe comprehension is the issue for your students, or maybe focus, then just scroll down the page where there's an outline of all those different themes, and there are links to all of the different elements there. So if you want to, we're going to give you 5 minutes to look at that.
3 minutes.
Sorry, 3 minutes. 3 minutes. Thank you, Ron. You have 3 minutes to look at that. To just choose one of them. And again, don't worry. We may end up having to rush you. And partly I apologise for that, but partly I don't apologise, because you can come back to this anytime. Click on those. Show it to your students, work through with your students. So if there's anything there that you think, yeah, that's great, I'll use that. So explore those links. In fact, probably I'm going to stop you exploring now, because I am aware that we want to move you on.
We've got a couple of minutes, Alistair.
Okay, a couple of minutes then. Thanks, Anya. We think it will be potentially very useful for you. Some of those links will go to, you know, like a Google Chrome plugin or something, or a plugin for Firefox. Some of them will go to a resource that we've put together that kind of gives you some background, why you want to do this, why it would be useful, tools that are like it. So the links go to a range of different places, but we think it should be useful. Any particular areas that you would like to, or that you'd like to just pop in the text chat pane? I'm going to look at this. If you've got time to do that in 20 seconds. If not, you can leave it to the end, because at the end we are going to ask you what's the one thing you're going to take away from today. So I think probably at that point, yeah, Barbara's going to try Spreed. Great. I love Spreed. It's great. Yeah, a couple of people there. Kerry. So fantastic. Keep those things coming in, because they're really good at just helping you to remember what it is you're going to take away from the session, and you can come back to this any point. You've got the URL. We'll have the recording later as well. I'm going to hand back to Ron, I believe.
Thanks, Alistair. And apologies to everyone for timekeeping, but we do want to allow you to explore all of the things that we had planned. And one of the things that we wanted to kind of just reiterate, really, Alistair's touched on it a number of times already, is that we believe that it's very easy to take text for granted. You know, after all, it's only text, so it shouldn't be a problem for anyone. But actually, the reverse, as there's been many examples already talked about, is often true. And also, we're certainly aware that a lot of people that have an e-learning authoring role or have some kind of involvement in selecting resources or creating resources will often put lots of attention into the technical compatibility and presentational aspects of multimedia content, but ignore give less attention to the simple text because it's kind of regarded as being straightforward and something that's easy to implement and use. So what we'd like to do is get you to explore a guided tour. And you can see on screen here, you've got the learning object link already, but we'll put a direct link to a separate learning object called Making Text Readable. And if I just copy that link and put it in the text chat so that you'll have a direct link to it as well. What we've created there is two kind of categories of examples. First one, if you're kind of fairly new to using and supporting text in its widest possible way, then there's some standard document formats like Google Doc and Word and PowerPoint and Google Slides. And the guidance and the tips in there are things to try with those examples. But we'd also like you to either during the webinar now or at a future point, explore your own examples and share your findings back with us via the text chat now, but also the mailing list when it's after the session. And for those of you who have a kind of more expert role, we have some examples of learning objects created with e-learning authoring tools. And again, we'd like you to explore those examples and the kind of scenarios that are described in them, but also, just as importantly, make the same checks and comparisons with the resources that you create or purchase or use back in your own institutions. So we'd like you to explore those for a few minutes and put your findings back in the text chat and your thoughts back in the text chat. So we'll be silent for a while, but we'll pick up on any questions or thoughts that you might have.
It's just worth saying that the resource link that we've put in the text chat, which is the one you're using now, actually takes you through the good practices and things to check. So this is a sort of meta level piece of work. In doing the analysis, you're going over and over and over what are good practices. We think it's a cunning plan.
And it's worth saying, Alistair, that the links to all the different examples are on page 4. Obviously, we've got that in the reading, but if people are skim reading and rushing through it, then obviously the thing to get to is that slide 4 so that you're exploring the same guidance, but in all the different formats or created with the different tools that we've provided. And we'd be particularly keen on anyone that is a regular creator of resources to share and create their own examples, and we've provided the assets to download the text and the images so that you can create an example with the same content but in your own preferred tools. So Lillian's saying that she couldn't add alt text to images in Google Docs and was surprised. I think I looked at that and discovered that I couldn't either. Do you know a trick to that, Alistair?
I don't know. I didn't even know it was a problem. So that's what I love about things like this. I go away learning lots of new stuff.
I mean, I know that the way that we created these examples is I imported the Word document into Google Docs and allowed it to convert. And the Word document had alt tags. So I'm not sure whether the images in the Google Doc therefore inherited those alt tags, and whether that's different from creating a Google Doc natively. And that might be worth exploring as well. And I think one of the things to come out of this example for us creating these examples, but also for the people exploring them, is it's a massively complex kind of set of checks and considerations, isn't it?
Well, there's two ways of looking at this, and I think in one respect it is, and even if you take a Word document, the accessibility features of a Word document read in Word compared to a Word document read as a Word online, even though you think it was identical, the accessibility features are quite different. And then the accessibility features of that same Word document made available through Google Docs, you know, again, as you say, some things will transfer and some won't. Now, I think what we want to achieve with you is not necessarily, in fact, not at all, that sense that, oh my goodness, this is 1,000 times more complex than I thought, so I'll just go away and bury myself in a hole. That wouldn't be the outcome we desire. What we do want to desire, what we do desire, is that you should recognize and help your students to recognize that even if there's not an exact compatibility between what's in Google Docs or Word or PowerPoint or whatever, for them to know what to look for, because if they know what to look for, first of all, they're likely to find things they didn't realize they could do. Lots of students don't know they can change colors in PDFs, for example. So if they know what to look for, that's really helpful. But also, ultimately, you'll then begin to be in a position where when you're creating something, you may begin to think, you know, if I do this in a different format, then they'll be able to access it on their mobile phones as well, and that will give them a bit more flexibility. So yes, it's complicated, but the real takeaway is be aware of the features of the format that you use. And we've got some quizzes at the end for you to look at that.
There's some questions in the text chat, Alistair. One from Catherine that I'll answer. You've asked about creating Word docs from PDFs. I know that you can import a PDF into Google Docs and tell it to open in Google Docs, and effectively it then creates a Google Doc of that PDF, depending on how the PDF was created in the first place. And then obviously you've got the equivalent of a Word doc, and you can also save from that Google Doc into Word and so on. So that might be worth a try. I don't know whether Alistair or Lillian have alternative ways of doing that, but that's one way I've done that in the past.
No, that sounds a good way. I also have a blind colleague who used to use Dropbox a lot because he found that when he accessed the document that was in Dropbox, the view that Dropbox gave him was more accessible than the native format that had been dropped in there. But again, that was several years ago. Things may have changed since then. So I think probably, again, we're saying this a lot, but we've wanted to provide you with a buffet of rich things. We've got sandwich bags you can use to take them away, so you don't have to eat it all now. But we would encourage you, not just on a personal basis, look at those different versions of these resources, but also we'd really encourage you to take these ideas and these resources back to your e-learning team and so on. So many e-learning teams would just use one particular tool to create everything. And sometimes they're using tools that actually create problems as they do it. And they ought to not necessarily use a different tool, but use that tool in a different way if they want to make it accessible. Ron, does that take us to the institutions? It does. You're such a mind reader. So one of the things that we want to really try to cover here is that we're talking about individual responsibilities of tutors in creating a document using heading styles, and so on, being mindful of the choice of formats that they use. But there's also a really big role for institutions. So staff development, staff awareness of good practice, staff awareness of the tools and the features that students could use to assist reading, the navigation pane, the bookmark view, the remagnification and reflow opportunities in Word and in PDFs and so on. But there's some really important stuff about the choice of content creation tools. There are procurement issues there about, do you choose a tool that allows you to create content that's natively accessible, or do you choose a tool that doesn't and you then have to add it afterwards? The choices of formats, the choices of ebook platforms, you know, if you're procuring ebooks and journals, well, some of them are a lot more accessible than others. And so you will automatically create problems for students if you procure massive chunks of content that nobody can change the color, nobody can copy, paste, select, use with a text-to-speech tool, etc. And which policies are we talking about? Interestingly, it's not just disability policies. It's procurement, it's teaching and learning, it's e-learning, it's IT, it's loads of things. This is a big area. So next one, we said it's a big area. And we're coming towards the end. Just one key task in a moment. I just wanted to kind of explore, these are some of the other things that we've missed out. Right at the beginning, we had some of the research that we haven't had time to go through, but you can follow it on your own. And we looked at that map, that sort of model, showing all the different areas to be mindful of. There are other things that, had we had more time with you, and it's delightful spending time with you, had we had more time, we recovered things like readability scores. We've got a couple of links there to find out how to do it yourselves. We'd have probably spent some time on the 6 metacognitive approaches that the research suggests, you know, are very effective in terms of strategies. That's in the research element back towards the beginning of the Xerte object. And of course, there are learner-based things that we haven't been able to look at. But if we go on to the next slide, this is over to Ron, I think.
It is. Thanks, Alistair. We want to reiterate that it's very important for those that have signed up to these Future Teacher Talks that this is just part of our project, and our main channel of communication is going to be the JISC mail list that we have. So if you haven't already joined that, please do. The instructions are in the learning object, as you can see on screen, and you could just go to jiscmail.ac.uk/future teacher to register, and then you're able to send via email and so on. We have an activity we'd like you to comment on in the text chat in a moment, but after that, on this learning object, you'll see that there's a summary and a knowledge check. And the knowledge check is a way of very quickly checking your recall, perhaps, understanding perhaps, of those kind of different issues that we have in each of those outlined examples. So all the guidance in the examples, the questions are based on that. And there are kind of 5 questions. And if you go through them, you'll actually get to a results page that will give you a summary of how you answered and so on. And then the final slide in the learning object is a bit more about this resource and about the use of Xerte for supporting reading. And of course, you've been seeing some of that functionality as we've been going through this anyway. So the final activity we'd like you to do, and by all means post anything you would like in the text chat, but the main question is, what one thing will you do as a result of what we've discussed? So anything you've heard about, seen today, reflections on what we've looked at. And we're also conscious that sometimes those ideas and those thoughts and those reflections don't necessarily materialize in the kind of short time that we have during the webinar. So again, in our mailing list, we'd like you to post the more kind of reflective ideas and thoughts and findings when you've revisited the resource. Because one bit of feedback that we always get is, I'm going to spend more time after the webinar looking at the resources. And of course, that might be today, it might be tomorrow, it might be next week or next month. Whenever you do, we'd like to capture your thoughts and findings and reflections. So please use the mailing list for that. But for right now, while you're in the webinar, please share your thoughts via the text chat. What one thing will you do as a result of what we've discussed today? Would you like to add anything else, Alistair?
I think only the purpose of getting you to do this is twofold. I think it's helpful in terms of you reflecting on the session and providing a focus and almost a revision thing. But it's also helpful for us because we can provide these webinars for free because of the European funding, but we do have to report back on certain metrics and impacts. And so if we can give a list of, right, there were so many people in this session and this is what they said they were going to go back and do, that's really helpful feedback for us to have something specific where we can point to practice or policy or uptake of tools, etc. So if you're thinking, oh, there's loads of things there, I'm not sure which I do, so I won't put anything, it's just really helpful if you could focus and think about how we can provide evidence of of value added to the chain, as it were.
Barbara said there that she's going to run through the learning object and pinch some bits. It's probably worth saying that we encourage you to do so and to share the resources that we're going to share, but actually part of the wider project that we've not really talked about during these webinars too much is the journeys that we're going to be developing and encouraging people to then explore these things in much more detail where the time constraints of an hour-long webinar aren't such a barrier. So all of the resources will become part of those journeys and be downloadable and repurposable as well as part of that. Bob, you're asking when the recording will be available. It will be available probably early next week. But we are trying to reward people that actually turn up to the webinars rather than just book and don't turn up. So we may put it behind a login, and that may be in our virtual learning environment as well. So we encourage you to sign up for that.
The other thing that I'll put in here, there will be organisations where you're thinking, I really don't know how reader-friendly our VLE is, or our intranet, or our prospectus, or this, that, and the other. If you're a GIST member, as I think everybody is, if you're in college or a university, I'm involved in an accessibility snapshot program, which is free to GIST members, where we come in, either I or a colleague would come in for a day, and we would take the role of a student and give you feedback on all your 5 key systems: prospectus, website, VLE, library platform, and assistive technologies, and we can do that. The link to it, I've popped it up in the chat pane above, tiny.cc/GISC-AI. It takes minimum organisation from the organisation's end of things. It's a lot easier to organise than the approach that Barbara will be familiar with.
It's interesting, Alistair, how things overlap as well. I know you on the alt list discussed the fact that there's the what's it called, the learning, there's extension to OneNote, the learning.
Oh yes, that's right.
Can you remember what that's called?
No, but it's about making reading easier.
Yeah, well, it's actually available in Word as well. Learning tools.
That's it. Yeah.
So actually, here on screen is the example Word document that we've shared, and if I just resize that so it's not overlapping the text chat, you have these ability to change the column width, change the page color, read aloud, and so on. So it's an extension to just the ability to read out the page. And it's unfortunate that those kind of things you have to customize the toolbar to be able to get to them, but it's there and available for anyone that's using the latest version of Word.
Yeah, free plugin. So do get onto your e-learning team and your IT team and say, oi, we'd like the learning tools for Office installed, because it'll work across OneNote, PowerPoint as well, I think it works on, and Word. So we have reached the magic time. We aimed to end at 10:02. We've slightly overrun, but we are. This is now the downtime. Do encourage you, if Ron, if you could just pop through the next couple of slides to show people if they haven't got to there yet, unless there's anything else you wanted to say. We've got some quizzes. Know your formats and tools. Have a go at doing them yourself, or pass them on to your disability department and your student support department. It'd be interesting to see if they know the answers to these when they recommend things to students. It's been great having you. Thank you for taking your time out on one of the rare sunny days we've had recently. And do join the mailing list and keep in touch with us.
Okay, I'll stop the recording as people were saying thank you and goodbye.